I caught my wife's 2 a.m. texts with her boss and lover. On speaker, her lover said, "Is the dumbass asleep yet?" So I exposed their affair on my wife's birthday and ended our marriage in front of 45 guests. My name is Marcus Hale, and up until 2:07 a.m. on a Tuesday night that I'll never forget, I was probably the most trusting idiot you'd ever meet. I'm talking about the kind of guy who actually believed his wife when she said she was working late for the third time that week. The kind of moron who never once thought to check her phone, even when it buzzed more than a Vegas slot machine during our movie nights. Hell, I was so naive I probably would have helped her charge the damn thing if she'd asked. But here's the thing about being a trusting fool. Eventually, the universe decides you've had enough blissful ignorance for one lifetime, and it smacks you upside the head with a reality check that hits harder than a freight train carrying nothing but divorce papers and broken dreams. So there I was, dead asleep in what I thought was our happy little suburban paradise, when Isabel's phone started going off like it was receiving emergency broadcasts from NASA. The glow from that screen lit up our bedroom brighter than a Times Square billboard. And let me tell you, after 8 years of marriage, you develop certain instincts about midnight phone buzzing. Most of the time, it's her mom having another one of her crisis moments about whether she remembered to turn off the oven, or maybe her sister drunk texting about her latest dating disaster. But this wasn't that kind of buzzing. This was insistent, repetitive, and had that particular rhythm that screams, somebody really wants to talk to your wife at 2 in the morning. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and my gut was telling me that something was seriously wrong with this picture. Isabel was out cold next to me, probably dreaming about whatever architectural blueprints she'd been obsessing over lately, or maybe fantasizing about that promotion she'd been chasing for months. She was always a heavy sleeper, could probably sleep through a marching band performing in our living room. So I figured I had a few minutes to satisfy my suddenly very awake curiosity that I reached over, my heart already starting to pound in that particular way it does when you're about to discover something you really don't want to know, and picked up her phone. The screen was still glowing, showing a string of notifications from someone named Adrian Carter. Now, I knew that name. Adrian was her boss at Morrison & Associates, the architecture firm where she'd been working her ass off for the past 3 years. Nice enough guy from what I'd heard, though I'd only met him a handful of times at company parties and office barbecues. But here's where things got interesting. And by interesting, I mean soul-crushingly, life-alteringly, marriage-ending interesting. Because Adrian Carter wasn't texting my wife about project deadlines or client meetings or any of that normal boss employee stuff you'd expect at 2 in the morning. Oh no, this was a completely different kind of professional relationship. The first message I saw made my stomach drop straight through the floor. God, I can't stop thinking about you. Tonight was incredible. Okay, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they'd had some kind of breakthrough on a big project. Maybe they'd landed a huge client. Maybe. Who am I kidding? I knew exactly what I was looking at, but my brain was still desperately trying to find some innocent explanation that didn't involve my wife cheating on me with her smooth-talking boss. But then I kept scrolling, and let me tell you, the evidence just kept piling up like a car accident in slow motion. Your body is driving me crazy. Can't wait to have you all to myself again. That thing you did with your... And yeah, I'm not going to repeat that particular detail, because some things can't be unread. And trust me, you don't want those images burned into your brain at 2:30 in the morning. The worst part? This wasn't some recent development. I could see weeks, maybe months of messages stretching back through their conversation history. Adrian knew things about our marriage that he had no business knowing. He knew that I'd been working overtime on the Henderson account. He knew about the argument Isabel and I had last week about whose turn it was to take out the garbage. He knew that I'd been stressed about my mom's health issues and had been staying up late making phone calls to her doctors. And then came the message that really twisted the knife. Poor Marcus, working so hard to provide for his little family. If only he knew his wife needed something he could never give her. Followed immediately by, "Can't wait to have you again tomorrow night. Same hotel." I sat there in the dark, staring at this glowing screen full of evidence that my marriage was nothing but a lie. And you know what the really crazy part was? I wasn't even surprised. Not really. All those late nights, all those client dinners, all those times she came home smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Somewhere deep down, I think I'd known something was off. I just hadn't wanted to admit it to myself because acknowledging it would mean admitting that I'd been living in a fantasy for God knows how long. But here's what really got me. The sheer arrogance of it all. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Adrian was calling me a dumbass in text messages to my own wife. They were making jokes about how clueless I was, how easy it was to sneak around behind my back, how I was too wrapped up in work to notice what was happening right under my nose. They were laughing at me, and honestly, that hurt worse than the actual betrayal. As I scrolled through message after message of their little love affair, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment mistake or a moment of weakness that got out of hand. This was calculated, deliberate, and had been going on for long enough that they'd developed their own little inside jokes and pet names and secret meeting spots. They had a whole relationship that existed parallel to my marriage, and I'd been completely oblivious to all of it. The phone buzzed again in my hands, and I watched a new message appear. Is the dumbass asleep yet? I've been thinking about last night. God, the way you moved when and that's where I stopped reading, because some things you just can't unsee, and I'd already seen more than enough to understand exactly what kind of situation I was dealing with. I set the phone back down exactly where I'd found it, slipped out of bed, and walked to the bathroom where I proceeded to throw up everything I'd eaten for dinner. Because that's what betrayal does to you. It doesn't just break your heart. It makes you physically sick, like your body is rejecting the reality of what your brain just processed. And as I sat there on the cold bathroom tile at 2:47 in the morning, one thought kept running through my head. Tomorrow morning, everything was going to change. You know what's funny about catching your wife cheating? And by funny, I mean absolutely soul-crushing and not remotely amusing in any way whatsoever. It's how normal the next morning feels until you remember that your entire life just got blown to smithereens a few hours earlier. I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of Isabel humming some Taylor Swift song in the kitchen, acting like she hadn't spent half the night sexting her boss about my apparent stupidity. For a split second, lying there in bed, I almost convinced myself that the whole thing had been some kind of nightmare. Maybe I'd just had too much wine with dinner and dreamed up the whole sordid affair. Maybe my subconscious was just working through some random insecurities about our marriage, and none of it was real. But then I saw her phone on the nightstand, and reality came crashing back down like a piano falling from a 20th-story window that I dragged myself downstairs, trying to figure out how the hell you're supposed to act normal when you've just discovered that your wife thinks you're a clueless moron who deserves to be cheated on. Do you smile and ask about her day? Do you kiss her goodbye and pretend everything's fine? Do you make small talk about the weather while internally screaming about hotel receipts and secret rendezvous? Isabel was standing at the counter in her favorite silk robe, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, scrolling through her phone with one hand while stirring sugar into her coffee with the other. She looked beautiful, relaxed, completely at peace with herself, like a woman who definitely wasn't living a double life or systematically destroying her marriage one text message at a time. "Morning, sweetheart," she said without looking up, and I swear to God, hearing her call me sweetheart after reading those messages made me want to chuck her coffee mug straight through the kitchen window. But instead, I just stood there like an idiot, trying to figure out my next move. Here's the thing about moments like this. You have two choices. You can explode immediately, scream and yell and demand explanations, and probably end up looking like some kind of unhinged psychopath, or you can play it smart and actually gather some real evidence before you blow everything up. And despite what Adrian Carter seemed to think about my intelligence level, I'm not actually a complete moron. So I walked over to the counter, poured myself a cup of coffee, and made what was probably the most important decision of my entire marriage. I picked up her phone, slid it across the granite countertop, and said, "We need to talk." The change in her expression was immediate and unmistakable. The color drained from her face faster than water going down a bathtub drain, and her eyes went wide with that particular look of panic that screams, "Oh shit, I've been caught." For about half a second, I could see her frantically trying to figure out exactly how much I knew and how she was going to talk her way out of it. But then, and this is where things got really interesting, she went on the offensive. Because apparently, the best defense when you've been caught cheating is to attack the person who caught you. "Why are you going through my phone?" She snapped, snatching it back like I'd just tried to steal her firstborn child. "What's wrong with you, Marcus? That's a complete violation of privacy." And there it was, the classic cheater's playbook, Step 1. Make the betrayed spouse feel guilty for discovering the betrayal. Turn the whole thing around so that somehow I was the bad guy for stumbling across evidence of her affair, instead of her being the bad guy for, actually having the affair. Privacy, I said, trying to keep my voice level even though every fiber of my being wanted to start throwing kitchen appliances. We're married, Isabel. We don't have secrets from each other. Or at least, I thought we didn't. She doubled down, hard. Started talking about how I was being paranoid and possessive, how Adrian was just a friend, how I was reading way too much into innocent conversations between colleagues. She had an explanation for everything. The late-night texting was about work stress. The personal comments were just friendly banter. The hotel references were about client meetings and business dinners. IT was actually impressive, in a completely sociopathic way. She delivered each lie with the kind of conviction that could probably convince a jury that black was white and up was down. If I hadn't seen those messages with my own eyes, I might have actually believed her. Hell, part of me wanted to believe her, because believing her would mean that my marriage wasn't completely destroyed and my life wasn't falling apart in real time. But then she said something that sealed the deal. If you're so paranoid about Adrian, why don't you call him? Ask him yourself. Maybe then you'll realize how ridiculous you're being. Now, I'm pretty sure she was expecting me to back down at that point. Maybe she figured I wouldn't have the balls to actually call her boss, or maybe she thought Adrian was smart enough to cover for her if I did. But what she didn't count on was me calling her bluff immediately and completely. You know what? I said, pulling out my own phone. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Adrian's number, because yes, I had her boss's phone number, because we'd exchanged information at a few company parties, because that's what normal people do when they meet their spouse's colleagues. I hit the call button and put the phone on speaker, because if we were doing this, we were doing it right. The phone rang twice before Adrian picked up, and his voice came through the speaker with that smooth, confident tone that I'd heard at office parties, but had never really paid attention to before. "Hey there, beautiful," he said, and I watched Isabel's face go from pale to completely white. "Is the dumbass asleep yet? I've been thinking about last night all morning. God, the way you felt when I..." The coffee mug slipped from Isabel's hands and shattered on the kitchen tile, sending ceramic shards and hot coffee splashing across the floor. But I barely noticed, because I was too busy listening to my wife's lover describe in vivid detail exactly what they'd been doing while I was working late the night before. "I can't wait to sneak you away again tonight," Adrian continued, completely oblivious to the fact that he was confessing to adultery on speakerphone in my kitchen. "That little hotel we found is perfect. Discreet, private, and far enough from your neighborhood that we don't have to worry about running into anyone who knows you and Marcus." I ended the call and looked at Isabel, who was standing in a puddle of coffee and broken ceramic, staring at me like I'd just performed some kind of dark magic trick. The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 seconds, and I could practically see her brain working overtime to figure out some way to explain away what we'd both just heard. But what could she say? How do you explain away your lover calling your husband a dumbass and describing your secret hotel rendezvous in explicit detail? How do you spin that into innocent workplace friendship? "Marcus," she finally said, and her voice was shaking now, all the confidence and righteous indignation completely gone. "I can explain." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You really can't." And that's when I realized that my marriage was over. Not because of the affair. That certainly didn't help, but because of the sheer scope of the deception. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, ongoing betrayal that involved mocking me, planning around my schedule, and creating an entire secret life that existed parallel to our marriage. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I'd married 8 years ago. Hell, I wasn't even sure I knew who she was anymore. You'd think that getting caught red-handed would be the end of it, right? Like, when your husband calls your lover on speakerphone and said lover immediately starts talking about sneaking you away to secret hotels, most normal people would just throw in the towel and admit defeat. But apparently, Isabel didn't get that memo, because instead of coming clean, she decided to double down on the gaslighting like she was going for some kind of world record in creative bullshit. Standing there in our kitchen, surrounded by coffee-soaked ceramic shards and the smoldering wreckage of our marriage, She looked at me with those big brown eyes that I used to find so beautiful and said, "Marcus, you don't understand. Adrian and I, we're just friends. He's been helping me through a really difficult time." A difficult time. That's what she called it. Like having an affair was some kind of therapeutic intervention instead of, completely destroying our marriage and making a mockery of everything we'd built together over the past 8 years. What difficult time? I asked, genuinely curious to see how deep this rabbit hole of lies was going to go. The difficult time of deciding which hotel to meet your boss at, or the difficult time of figuring out how to hide it from your dumbass husband. She flinched when I used Adrian's word, but she didn't back down. If anything, she seemed to find some kind of second wind, like she'd decided that the best way out of this mess was straight through it. "You've been so distant lately," she said, and I swear to God, she actually managed to make her voice sound hurt and vulnerable, like she was the victim in this situation. "Working all those late nights, stressed about your mother, barely talking to me when you get home." I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood what I was going through. And there it was, somehow, some way, this was all my fault. Because I'd been working hard to pay for our mortgage and her car payments and the vacation to Italy she'd been planning for months, I'd driven her straight into the arms of her sympathetic boss. Because I'd been worried about my mom's health issues and maybe hadn't been the most attentive husband lately, I'd basically forced her to start an affair. The really twisted part was that she almost sold it. She had tears in her eyes. Her voice was shaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. And if I didn't know better, I might have actually started feeling guilty about neglecting my poor, lonely wife who just needed a shoulder to cry on. But here's the thing about gaslighting. Once you know what it looks like, you can't unsee it. And I'd just spent the past hour reading text messages that were definitely not about emotional support. Unless emotional support was code for detailed descriptions of sexual positions and plans for future hotel meetings. Emotional support, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. "Is that what we're calling it now?" She nodded eagerly, like she was relieved that I was finally starting to understand. "Yes, exactly. Adrian has been such a good friend to me, helping me work through my feelings about our marriage, giving me advice about how to reconnect with you." I had to give her credit. She was really committing to this story. Most people would have cracked by now, but Isabel was doubling down like her life depended on it. Which, I guess it kind of did. "So when Adrian was texting you about your body driving him crazy," I said, "that was relationship advice. He was just being supportive," she said without missing a beat. "You know how men are? They don't always express their emotions in the most appropriate ways." But his heart was in the right place. And the hotel. We met for dinner a few times to talk about my problems. The hotel has a really nice restaurant. At midnight. The restaurant stays open late. It was like watching a master class in creative fiction, except instead of being impressed, I was starting to feel physically sick again. Because this wasn't just lying. This was a complete rewriting of reality, a systematic attempt to make me question my own sanity and believe that what I'd seen with my own eyes wasn't actually what had happened. But then she said something that really caught my attention. "Marcus, if you really can't trust me, if you really think I'm capable of having an affair, then maybe we need to talk about what that says about our marriage." And boom, there it was. The ultimate gaslighting move. Not only was the affair not her fault, but my reaction to discovering it was actually the real problem. My inability to trust her obvious lies was the thing that was destroying our relationship, not her actual betrayal. That I stood there looking at this woman I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, watching her perform mental gymnastics that would make Olympic athletes jealous, and I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I was fascinated, because this level of deception requires serious skill. You can't just wake up one day and decide to gaslight your spouse this effectively. This was the kind of manipulation that takes practice, refinement, years of honing your craft. Which meant that either Isabel was some kind of natural-born sociopath, or this wasn't the first time she'd lied to me about something major. How many other times had she looked me straight in the eye and told me elaborate stories that were complete fabrications? How many arguments had we had where she'd convinced me that I was the one being unreasonable? How many times had I apologized for things that weren't actually my fault because she'd managed to twist the situation around until I couldn't tell which way was up? "You're right," I said, and I watched her face light up with relief. "Maybe we do need to talk about what this says about our marriage." She nodded enthusiastically, probably thinking she'd successfully talked her way out of the whole mess. I'm so glad you understand. I was starting to worry that you didn't trust me anymore. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, and something in my tone must have warned her that this conversation wasn't going where she thought it was going. Because her smile faltered just a little bit, here's what I understood. I was married to a woman who was capable of looking me in the eye and lying with such conviction that she almost had me believing that black was white. I was married to someone who could carry on a months-long affair and then, when caught, immediately pivot to making me feel like the bad guy for discovering it. But here's what she didn't understand. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to fight, and I wasn't going to give her any more opportunities to twist this situation around. Because the moment she started gaslighting me instead of coming clean, she'd shown me exactly who she really was. And now that I knew who I was dealing with, I could plan accordingly. I think you should call Adrian back, I said calmly. Apologize for hanging up on him so abruptly. Tell him everything's fine, that I bought your story about emotional support and hotel restaurants. She looked confused but hopeful. Really, because you're right. Trust is the foundation of marriage. And I want you to know that I trust you completely. The smile that spread across her face was radiant, triumphant. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully convinced me that my lying eyes and ears were wrong, that her version of reality was the correct one. And I let her think that. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate. Sometimes it's letting your opponent think they've won while you quietly gather the ammunition you need to destroy them completely. My silence scared her more than any shouting match ever could have, but she didn't know that yet. So here's the thing about pretending to believe your cheating wife's ridiculous lies while secretly planning to destroy her entire world. It's harder than it looks. I'm talking about Academy Award-level acting, the kind of performance that deserves a standing ovation and maybe a Lifetime Achievement Award for not strangling someone with your bare hands. For the next week, I became the most understanding, supportive husband in the history of marriage. When Isabel announced she had another late presentation to work on with Adrian, I smiled and told her to take all the time she needed. When she came home at midnight smelling like expensive cologne and hotel soap, I asked how the meeting went and nodded sympathetically when she complained about difficult clients. When she spent 20 minutes in the shower scrubbing off evidence of her emotional support sessions, I made her tea and rubbed her shoulders like the considerate husband I was pretending to be. It was absolutely exhausting, and also kind of terrifying how easy it was to fake. Made me wonder how long she'd been putting on the same kind of performance for me. But while I was busy winning an Oscar for Best Actor in a Dying Marriage, I was also making some very important phone calls. The first one was to Leo Burns, my best friend from college, and, more importantly, a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases and had seen enough cheating spouses to write a book about creative infidelity. You sound surprisingly calm for a guy whose wife is banging her boss, Leo said when I finished explaining the situation. We were sitting in his office downtown, surrounded by law books and framed diplomas that made the whole thing feel official and final in a way that scared the hell out of me. I'm not calm, I said. I'm strategic. There's a difference. Leo grinned. Good. Angry people make stupid decisions. Strategic people make their cheating wives wish they'd never been born. So what's the plan? That was Leo for you. Straight to the point and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting his friends. We'd been through college together, stood up at each other's weddings, and spent countless nights drinking beer and complaining about life's various injustices. If anyone was going to help me navigate this nightmare, it was him. I need evidence, I said. Real evidence. Documentation that will hold up in court and make it impossible for her to claim this was all some big misunderstanding. Smart man. And lucky for you, I know just the person to help with that. Which is how I ended up meeting Detective Janice Rowe, a private investigator who looked like somebody's sweet grandmother, but talked like a hardened cop who'd seen every type of human garbage the world had to offer. She had silver hair, kind eyes, and the sort of no-nonsense attitude that made you immediately trust her to get the job done. Cheating spouse case? She asked before I'd even finished introducing myself. Let me guess. Wife's having an affair with her boss, you caught them texting, and now you want proof that will stick in divorce court. How did you? Honey, I've been doing this for 23 years. There are only so many ways these stories go. She pulled out a notepad and clicked her pen. Tell me everything, and don't leave out any details, no matter how embarrassing or painful they are. I've heard it all before, and the more I know, the better I can help you." So I told her everything. The 2 a.m. text messages, the phone call with Adrian, Isabel's gaslighting masterclass, my decision to play dumb while gathering evidence. Janice took notes the whole time, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making little humming sounds that could have meant anything. "Your wife's sloppy," she said when I finished. "Amateur hour, really." Most cheaters at least try to be discreet, but these two are acting like they're in some kind of romantic comedy where the husband is too stupid to notice what's happening right under his nose. "So you can help?" "Oh, honey, I can do way better than help. I can give you enough evidence to bury both of them so deep they'll need archaeological equipment to dig their way out." The plan was simple but thorough. Janice would get phone records for both Isabel and Adrian, documenting the frequency and timing of their calls and texts. She'd track their credit card usage to identify hotel bills, restaurant charges, and any other evidence of their secret meetings. She'd follow them during their work sessions and document exactly where they went and how long they stayed. The goal, she explained, is to create a timeline that's so detailed and comprehensive that there's no possible way for them to explain it away. "We want dates, times, locations, receipts, photographs, everything." "How long will it take?" "Give me 2 weeks. Maybe less if they're as careless as they seem to be." 2 weeks. That was how long I had to keep up the charade, pretending to believe Isabel's lies while Janice systematically documented every detail of her betrayal. 2 weeks of smiling and nodding and acting like the trusting husband while secretly building the case that would end our marriage. The hardest part wasn't the lying, it was the intimacy. Because Isabel, thinking she'd successfully fooled me, became more affectionate than she'd been in months. She'd curl up next to me on the couch while watching TV, her head on my shoulder, and I'd have to resist the urge to push her away. She'd kiss me goodbye in the morning before heading off to work, and I'd have to kiss her back and tell her to have a good day, knowing she was going to spend her lunch break in a hotel room with Adrian. The worst was when she started talking about our future again. Plans for remodeling the kitchen, ideas for vacation destinations, even mentions of maybe starting a family soon. She'd gotten so comfortable with her double life that she was making long-term plans with both me and her lover, apparently without seeing any contradiction in that. "I feel like we're in such a good place right now," she said one night, snuggled up against me in bed. "Like we've worked through whatever rough patch we were going through and come out stronger on the other side." I made some non-committal noise and stroked her hair, all while thinking about the fact that she'd spent 3 hours that afternoon in room 412 at the Marriott downtown. Janice had the photos to prove it. Isabel and Adrian walking into the hotel hand in hand, Adrian's arm around her waist like they were some kind of legitimate couple instead of two people systematically destroying 2 marriages. "I love you so much, Marcus," Isabel whispered into the darkness. "I know I haven't always been the best wife, but I want you to know that you mean everything to me." And that's when I realized that she actually believed what she was saying. In her mind, somehow, she'd managed to compartmentalize the affair so completely that it didn't contradict her feelings for me. She could spend her afternoons having sex with Adrian and her evenings cuddling with me. And in her twisted logic, both relationships were equally valid and meaningful. It was either the most sophisticated form of self-deception I'd ever witnessed, or she was genuinely sociopathic. Either way, it made what I was planning to do a lot easier. "I love you too," I whispered back, and managed to sound like I meant it. 3 days later, Janice called with an update that exceeded even my expectations. "I've got enough evidence to convict them of adultery in a court of law," she said. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts over the past 6 months. Hotel receipts totaling over $3,000. Credit card charges for lingerie, jewelry, expensive dinners, and photographs of them together that leave absolutely no room for interpretation. How bad are the photos? Let's just say that if you were on the fence about divorce before, these pictures will push you right off it. Perfect. Because in exactly 1 week, it was going to be Isabel's birthday, and she'd already invited 45 people to celebrate at our house, including Adrian Carter. There's something deeply satisfying about planning the perfect revenge, especially when your target keeps digging their own grave deeper with every passing day. It's like watching someone build their own gallows while humming a happy tune, completely oblivious to the fact that they're about to hang themselves with their own rope. Isabel was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement about her birthday party. She'd been planning this thing for weeks, sending out invitations, coordinating the catering, obsessing over the guest list like she was organizing a state dinner instead of a backyard barbecue for 45 people. She wanted everything to be perfect, which was ironic considering her life was about to become the exact opposite of perfect in the most spectacular way possible. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," she said, sprawled across our bed with her laptop, updating the guest list for probably the 15th time that week. "It feels like forever since we've had a real party. I'm so excited for everyone to see how happy we are. How happy we are." That's what she said, with a completely straight face, while simultaneously texting Adrian about their plans to meet at the hotel after her birthday dinner. The cognitive dissonance was honestly impressive, like watching someone play chess against themselves and somehow managing to lose. "It's going to be amazing," I agreed, sitting next to her and pretending to care about seating arrangements while mentally reviewing the checklist Leo and I had put together. "Who's confirmed so far?" She scrolled through the responses with the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. "Mom and Dad, obviously. Sarah and Tom from work. The Johnsons from next door. Most of my college friends. And Adrian said he'll definitely be there, which is great because I really want him to meet more of our friends. Adrian Carter, attending the party where I was going to expose his affair with the guest of honor. The man had balls, I'll give him that. Either that, or he was genuinely stupid enough to think he could sit at my dinner table, eat my food, and make small talk with my family while secretly planning to screw my wife later that night. Perfect, I said. The more the merrier. What Isabel didn't know was that I'd been doing some guest list management of my own. While she was busy coordinating appetizers and playlist selections, I was making a very special phone call to someone who deserved to know exactly what her husband had been up to during his late work meetings. Finding Adrian's wife hadn't been difficult. Janice had provided me with enough personal information to track down Linda Carter, a kindergarten teacher who posted adorable pictures of her students' artwork on social media and seemed to genuinely believe that her husband was working overtime to secure their financial future. She had no idea that his idea of securing their future involved spending thousands of dollars on hotel rooms and gifts for his mistress. The phone call was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. How do you tell a complete stranger that their spouse is cheating? How do you destroy someone's world over the phone and then invite them to watch the whole thing blow up in person? "Mrs. Carter, my name is Marcus Hale. I'm married to Isabel Hale, who works with your husband at Morrison and Associates." I took a deep breath and jumped off the cliff. "I'm calling because I have some information about Adrian that I think you need to know." The silence on the other end lasted so long that I started to wonder if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "How long?" "At least 6 months that I can prove. Probably longer." Another silence, and then I knew something was wrong. "He's been so distant lately, working such long hours." I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, but she trailed off, and I could hear her crying softly. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I know this is horrible news, and I wish I didn't have to be the one telling you. But you deserve to know the truth. What are you going to do?" That was the million-dollar question. I could have handled this quietly, filed for divorce, split our assets, and moved on with my life like a civilized adult. Most people would have taken the high road, kept their dignity intact, and dealt with the whole mess behind closed doors. But I wasn't feeling particularly civilized. "My wife is having a birthday party this Saturday," I said. "Adrian is invited, along with about 44 other people. I'm planning to expose the affair in front of everyone." "Jesus," Linda breathed. That's brutal. They made a fool of me for months," I said. Laughed about how stupid I was, joked about how easy it was to sneak around behind my back. "They want to treat me like an idiot? Fine, but they're going to pay for it publicly. What do you want from me?" "I want you to be there. I want Adrian to see your face when the truth comes out. I want him to know that his actions have consequences that extend beyond just my marriage." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically hear her weighing the options. Stay home and deal with this privately, or show up to watch her husband's affair get exposed in front of a crowd of strangers. What time should I be there? God, I liked this woman already. The rest of the week passed in a blur of party preparations and secret planning sessions. While Isabel obsessed over centerpieces and appetizer platters, Leo and I finalized the legal documents. While she coordinated with the caterer about dietary restrictions, Janice organized the evidence into neat manila folders that would be impossible to ignore or explain away. The plan was simple but devastating. I'd wait until after dinner, when everyone was relaxed and happy, gathered around for the traditional birthday toast. Then, instead of the usual speech about how wonderful my wife was, I'd present the evidence of her affair to our family, friends, and colleagues. I'd hand out copies of the hotel receipts, the phone records, and yes, the photographs. I'd make sure everyone understood exactly what kind of person they'd been celebrating. "You sure you want to do this?" Leo asked during one of our final planning sessions. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. This isn't just ending your marriage, it's nuking it from orbit." "She nuked it first," I said. "I'm just making sure everyone can see the crater." The really beautiful part was how perfectly Isabel was setting herself up for the fall. She'd invited everyone who mattered to her, her parents, her siblings, her closest friends, her work colleagues. She'd chosen to celebrate her birthday at our house, in the space we'd built together, surrounded by the life we'd created. She wanted to show off how happy and successful and loved she was. Instead, she was going to find out what it felt like to be publicly humiliated by the person who was supposed to love her most. She was going to watch her reputation crumble in real time, in front of everyone whose opinion she cared about. And the cherry on top? Adrian would be sitting right there, watching his mistress get destroyed while his own wife stared at him from across the room, knowing exactly what kind of man she'd married. "It's going to be ugly," Leo warned. "Good," I said. "It should be ugly. What they did was ugly, and they should have to face the consequences in an equally ugly way." 2 days before the party, Isabel found me in the kitchen going over the final head count for the caterer. 45 people, she said, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "Can you believe it? 45 people who love us enough to come celebrate with us on a Saturday night. It's going to be unforgettable," I said, and for once, I wasn't lying. "I love you so much, Marcus. Thank you for being the most amazing husband in the world." I turned around and kissed her, tasting the lie on her lips, knowing it would be the last kiss we'd ever share as husband and wife. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said. "I can't wait to give you your present." Saturday arrived like Christmas morning. If Christmas morning involved planning the systematic destruction of your marriage in front of half the neighborhood. I woke up at 6:30, which was pretty impressive considering I'd barely slept for the past 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept rehearsing different versions of what I was going to say, how I was going to present the evidence, what Isabel's face would look like when she realized her perfect little world was about to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. Isabel was already up, standing in front of our bedroom mirror in her silk bathrobe, applying makeup with the kind of precision usually reserved for brain surgery. She'd been getting ready for this party like she was preparing for the Met Gala, trying on different outfits, experimenting with hairstyles, obsessing over every detail of her appearance. She wanted to look perfect for her big day, which was tragically ironic considering how imperfect everything was about to become. "How do I look?" she asked, turning to show me the final result. She was wearing a midnight blue dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, paired with the diamond earrings I'd bought her for our 5th anniversary. Her hair was styled in loose waves that cascaded over her shoulders, and her makeup was flawless, the kind of effortless beauty that actually takes 2 hours to achieve. She looked absolutely stunning, which somehow made what I was about to do both easier and harder at the same time. "You look beautiful," I said, and meant it. Because she did look beautiful, even though she was also a lying, cheating sociopath who'd been systematically destroying our marriage for months. Funny how those two things can coexist in the same person. "I'm so excited," she said, practically bouncing on her toes. "I keep thinking about how perfect everything's going to be. All our favorite people in one place, celebrating together. It's like a dream come true. A dream that was about to turn into a nightmare. But I kept that observation to myself." The caterers arrived at noon, followed by the rental company with extra chairs and tables for the backyard. Our house transformed into party central, with white linens and string lights and enough food to feed a small army. Isabel fluttered around like a caffeinated butterfly, directing traffic and making sure every detail was exactly right, that I played my part perfectly, the supportive husband helping his wife create the perfect birthday celebration. I carried tables, hung decorations, and made small talk with the catering staff while mentally going over my checklist one final time. The evidence folders were hidden in my office upstairs, organized and ready to be distributed. Leo was on standby with the divorce papers, which we decided to present as the grand finale of the evening's entertainment. Linda Carter had confirmed she'd be there at 7:30, just in time for the main event. Everything was falling into place with the kind of precision that would have made a Swiss watchmaker jealous. The first guests arrived at 6 o'clock, Isabel's parents, who immediately launched into their usual routine of fussing over their daughter like she was still 12 years old. Her mother brought homemade cookies and proceeded to rearrange the appetizer table 3 times, while her father commandeered the sound system and started playing music from his own carefully curated playlist of classic rock hits. "Marcus, you've outdone yourself," Isabel's mother said, squeezing my arm with genuine affection. "This is exactly the kind of party our little girl deserves." Our little girl. If only she knew what her little girl had been up to in downtown hotel rooms for the past 6 months. More guests trickled in over the next hour: college friends, work colleagues, neighbors, extended family members. The backyard filled with laughter and conversation, the kind of warm, convivial atmosphere that makes you remember why you like having people over in the first place. Everyone was in a great mood, ready to celebrate Isabel's 32nd birthday and enjoy a beautiful Saturday evening. Isabel was in her element, working the room like a politician at a campaign rally. She hugged everyone who walked through the door, complimented the women on their outfits, asked about people's kids and jobs and vacation plans. She was charming and gracious and genuinely delighted to see everyone, playing the role of perfect hostess with the kind of natural charisma that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. That IT was almost enough to make me forget why I was planning to destroy her life in front of all these people. Almost. Adrian arrived at 7:15, fashionably late, and wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my car payment. He brought flowers, expensive orchids that must have come from some high-end florist downtown, and a bottle of champagne that looked like it belonged in a museum. The man had style, I'll give him that. "Marcus," he said, shaking my hand with the kind of firm grip that business school probably teaches in a class called How to Project Confidence While Screwing Your Employee's Husband. "Great party, man. Isabel looks absolutely radiant." Radiant. That's what he called her, right to my face, while knowing exactly why she was glowing. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "She's been looking forward to this for weeks," I said, managing to keep my voice level and friendly. "It means a lot to her that you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Adrian replied, and I watched his eyes scan the crowd until they found Isabel across the yard. The look that passed between them was subtle but unmistakable, the kind of intimate glance that lovers share when they think no one is watching. Except I was watching. I was watching everything to AT728. I spotted Linda Carter walking up our front walkway, and I have to admit, I was impressed by her composure. She looked nervous but determined, like someone who'd made a difficult decision and was seeing it through no matter what. She was dressed simply but elegantly in a black sundress, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet dignity that suggested she was stronger than her kindergarten teacher exterior might imply. I intercepted her at the front door before she could ring the bell. "Linda, Marcus." She nodded once, her jaw set with grim determination. "Is he here?" "He's here. Are you ready for this?" She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "I've been ready since Tuesday." "Perfect." Because at 7:30 exactly, the catering staff was going to wheel out the birthday cake, and I was going to ask everyone to gather around for the traditional toast. And then, instead of talking about how wonderful Isabel was, I was going to give our guests a very different kind of entertainment that I guided Linda through the house and out to the backyard, where the party was in full swing. The string lights created a warm, golden glow over the assembled crowd, and everyone looked relaxed and happy, completely unaware that they were about to witness the most spectacular marriage implosion in suburban history. Adrian was standing near the bar, telling some story that had Isabel and 3 of her co-workers laughing appreciatively. He was animated and charming, the center of attention, completely in his element. He had no idea that his wife was standing 20 feet away, watching him with the kind of expression usually reserved for particularly venomous snakes. The cake arrived right on schedule, 3 layers of chocolate decadence with "Happy Birthday, Isabel" written in flowing script across the top. The catering staff positioned it on the main table and began lighting the candles while guests started gathering around, pulling out their phones to capture the moment. Isabel stood next to the cake, practically glowing with happiness, surrounded by everyone she loved most in the world. She looked like a woman who had everything: a successful career, a beautiful home, a loving husband, and loyal friends who'd taken time out of their Saturday night to celebrate with her. She had no idea that in about 30 seconds, she was going to discover what it felt like to lose everything at once. That I picked up my wine glass and tapped it gently with a fork, the clear chiming sound cutting through the conversations and drawing everyone's attention. If I could have everyone's attention, I called out, and the backyard gradually fell silent. I'd like to propose a toast to the birthday girl. Isabel beamed at me, her eyes shining with love and gratitude. Around us, 45 people raised their glasses and waited to hear what her devoted husband had to say about the woman they'd all come to celebrate. I smiled back at her, took a deep breath, and prepared to detonate the bomb that would end our marriage forever. Here's the thing about moments that change everything. They happen slowly and all at once, like watching a car accident in slow motion while simultaneously getting hit by a freight train. 1 second, everyone's smiling and raising their glasses for what they think is going to be a sweet birthday toast. And the next second, you're systematically destroying someone's entire existence in front of their closest friends and family. But I stood there holding my wine glass, looking out at 45 expectant faces bathed in the warm glow of string lights, and felt a weird sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the point of no return. In about 60 seconds, half these people were going to hate me. Isabel was going to wish she'd never been born, and Adrian Carter was going to discover what it felt like to have his world collapse in real time. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet backyard. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Isabel's birthday. It means the world to both of us to have our closest friends and family gathered together like this. Isabel glowed like a freaking Christmas tree, her smile so radiant it could have powered half the neighborhood. She mouthed, "I love you," at me, and I felt that familiar twist in my chest that I'd been carrying around for weeks now. Part heartbreak, part rage, part something that might have been relief that this nightmare was finally coming to an end. When I think about my wife, I continued, watching Isabel's face as she basked in what she thought was going to be a romantic tribute. I think about the woman I thought I knew. The woman I married 8 years ago, who I believed was honest, faithful, and devoted to our marriage. A few people in the crowd made those soft, sounds that audiences make during particularly sweet moments, and I saw Isabel's mother dab at her eyes with a tissue. Even Adrian was smiling, the smug bastard, probably thinking about how he was going to console Isabel later when she told him how moved she was by her husband's beautiful words. "But tonight," I said, and I watched the first flicker of confusion cross Isabel's face as my tone shifted from loving to something considerably darker. "I want to talk about the woman I actually married. The woman who's been living a double life for the past 6 months." The change in the atmosphere was immediate and electric. You could practically feel the collective intake of breath, that moment when a room full of people realizes that what they're witnessing isn't what they expected at all. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the catering staff stopped what they were doing and turned to stare. Isabel's smile faltered, her face going pale in the golden light. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what are you doing?" "I'm giving you your birthday present, sweetheart," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out the first manila envelope. The gift of truth. I set the envelope on the table next to her birthday cake, and the sound it made hitting the white tablecloth was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Then I pulled out another envelope, and another, and another. 5 envelopes total, each one containing enough evidence to bury both her and Adrian so deep they'd need archaeological equipment to dig their way out. "Inside these envelopes," I announced to the stunned crowd, "you'll find photographs, hotel receipts, phone records, and credit card statements documenting my wife's affair with her boss, Adrian Carter." The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Gasps erupted from multiple directions. Someone dropped their wine glass, and it shattered on the patio stones. Isabel's mother made a sound like she'd been physically struck, while her father started swearing under his breath in a way that would have made a sailor proud. But the best reaction, and by best, I mean most satisfying in a deeply vindictive way, came from Adrian himself. The man went from smug confidence to absolute panic in about half a second, his face draining of color so fast I briefly worried he might actually pass out right there on my lawn. He started looking around frantically, probably searching for the nearest exit, when his eyes landed on someone standing near the back of the crowd, Linda Carter, his wife. The kindergarten teacher who'd spent the last week planning exactly what she was going to say to her cheating husband when this moment arrived. "Adrian," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "I think we need to talk." If Adrian had looked panicked before, now he looked like a man staring into the abyss. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Apparently, all that smooth-talking confidence he'd displayed while seducing my wife had completely abandoned him now that he was facing the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, Isabel was still standing next to her birthday cake, frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. The woman who'd spent months gaslighting me and spinning elaborate lies was suddenly speechless, unable to come up with a single explanation for the evidence sitting right there on the table. "Marcus, please," she finally managed, her voice shaking. "Can we talk about this privately? This isn't. We don't need to do this in front of everyone." "Oh, but we do," I said, opening the first envelope and pulling out a stack of photographs that Janice had taken over the past 2 weeks. "See, you made me look like a fool for months. You laughed about how stupid I was, joked about how easy it was to sneak around behind my back. You wanted to make this public? Well, congratulations. It's public now." I held up the first photograph. Adrian and Isabel walking hand in hand into the Marriott downtown, looking for all the world like a couple heading off on a romantic getaway. Then the second photo, them kissing in the hotel parking lot. Then the third, well, let's just say it left very little to the imagination about what they'd been doing in room 412 that the crowd's reaction was like watching dominoes fall. Some people turned away in embarrassment. Others pulled out their phones, probably already composing text messages to friends who weren't there. Isabel's college roommate started crying. One of her coworkers made a disgusted sound and headed for the door, but the most beautiful moment, and I'm using beautiful in the most twisted way possible, came when Linda Carter walked across the yard to where her husband was standing, took one of the photographs from my hand, and held it up for everyone to see. "This is what my husband has been doing during his late work meetings," she announced, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "While I was home grading papers and making dinner, he was in hotel rooms with his employee, spending our savings on their little affair." Adrian tried to say something, probably some version of the same gaslighting bullshit that Isabel had tried to pull on me, but Linda cut him off. "Don't," she said. "Just don't. I've already talked to a lawyer. I've already moved your stuff out of our house. And after tonight, everyone you work with, everyone you know, everyone in your professional network is going to know exactly what kind of man you are." The crowd was starting to disperse now, people gathering their belongings and making uncomfortable excuses about needing to get home early. Nobody wanted to stick around for the rest of this particular show, which was understandable. They'd come for birthday cake and small talk, not for a front row seat to the most spectacular marriage implosion in recent memory, but I wasn't done yet. I reached into my other jacket pocket and pulled out the final surprise of the evening, a thick manila envelope that contained divorce papers, already filled out and ready for signature. "Happy birthday, Isabel," I said, setting the papers down on top of her cake, right next to the evidence of her betrayal. "This marriage ends tonight." Then I looked out at the remaining guests, the ones who were too shocked to move, too fascinated by the train wreck to look away, and gave them a smile that probably looked completely unhinged. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "Sorry about the cake." And with that, I walked into my house, leaving my wife standing in the wreckage of her birthday party, surrounded by the smoking ruins of everything she'd built with her lies. The silence behind me was absolute. You know what's funny about destroying someone's life in front of 45 witnesses? The immediate aftermath is somehow both exactly what you expect and nothing like what you imagined at the same time. I'd spent weeks planning this moment, rehearsing different versions of my speech, anticipating various reactions from the crowd. But nothing really prepares you for the actual sound of a marriage exploding in real time. The gasps, the whispers, the uncomfortable shuffling of feet, as people try to figure out whether they should stay and gawk or run for the exits like their asses are on fire. And I made it about 10 feet into the house before the chaos really erupted behind me. Through the sliding glass door, I could hear Isabel's voice rising to a pitch that probably had dogs barking 3 neighborhoods over, trying to explain away photographic evidence of her infidelity like she was defending her doctoral thesis on creative excuses. "Those pictures are taken out of context," she was saying, her voice cracking with desperation. "Adrian and I were working on a project together. The hotel has conference rooms. We were meeting with clients. Conference rooms. Right. Because clearly, the best way to conduct business meetings is by sucking face in a hotel parking lot and then disappearing into a room for 3 hours. I had to give her credit for commitment to the lie, even when the lie was so obviously bullshit that it insulted everyone's intelligence. But the real entertainment was happening on the other side of the yard, where Linda Carter was having what could only be described as a very public conversation with her soon-to-be ex-husband. And by conversation, I mean she was systematically destroying him with the kind of precision that would have made a surgeon jealous. 23 years. I heard her say, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet backyard. 23 years I've been married to you, Adrian. 23 years of supporting your career, hosting your colleagues, smiling at your work parties while you were probably planning which employee to screw next. Adrian was trying to do damage control, gesturing frantically and speaking in the kind of low, urgent tones that suggested he was either apologizing profusely or trying to convince his wife that she was hallucinating the evidence of his affair. Either way, it wasn't working. Linda had the look of a woman who'd moved far beyond the possibility of forgiveness and was now operating in pure scorched earth mode. Meanwhile, Isabel's family was having their own meltdown in spectacular fashion. Her mother was alternating between sobbing into her husband's shoulder and shooting murderous glares at Adrian, like she was trying to decide whether to collapse from grief or commit homicide. Her father, a normally mild-mannered accountant who probably hadn't raised his voice since the Clinton administration, was red-faced and sputtering with the kind of rage usually reserved for people who discover that their parking meter expired 30 seconds before the ticket was written. "How could you do this to Marcus?" her mother wailed, apparently forgetting that I was standing right there and could hear every word. "He's such a good man. He loves you so much. How could you throw it all away for?" She gestured wildly at Adrian, who was looking increasingly like he wanted to spontaneously combust rather than deal with the consequences of his actions. The guests were handling the situation about as well as you'd expect people to handle the sudden transformation of a birthday party into a Jerry Springer episode. Most of them were doing that awkward thing where they gathered their purses and started making excuses about early mornings and babysitters, desperate to escape before things got even more uncomfortable. A few die-hard drama enthusiasts were lingering near the edges of the yard, probably hoping for round 2 of the public humiliation spectacular. But the real show was happening when Isabel's work colleagues started putting 2 and 2 together and realizing that they'd been watching their boss have an affair with their coworker for months without knowing it. The whispered conversations and meaningful glances were flying faster than gossip at a high school reunion. "Oh my God," I heard one of them say. "That's why she got that promotion so fast, and why she's been staying late so much recently. Remember that conference in Chicago? When they both happened to be there at the same time." It was like watching dominoes fall in real time, each revelation triggering another memory, another suspicious incident that suddenly made perfect sense. Isabel's professional reputation wasn't just damaged. It was completely obliterated, nuked from orbit with the kind of thoroughness that would take years to recover from, if recovery was even possible. Adrian, meanwhile, was discovering what it felt like to have his personal life become the subject of office gossip in the most humiliating way possible. I could see his co-workers exchanging glances, probably mentally reviewing every interaction they'd had with him over the past few months and wondering what else they'd missed. His career wasn't just over. It was over in a way that would follow him to every job interview, every networking event, every professional interaction for the rest of his working life. But the absolute pinnacle of the evening's entertainment came when Linda Carter walked over to where Isabel was still trying to convince people that the photographs were somehow innocent, and the two women came face to face for the first time. "You," Linda said, and her voice was so cold it could have frozen hell over, "are a home-wrecking little slut who destroyed 2 families for what? A few hotel room hookups with my husband." The entire backyard went dead silent. Even the people who'd been heading for the exit stopped to watch this particular confrontation, because sometimes you witness something so dramatic that you literally cannot look away, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you. Isabel tried to respond, probably with some version of her "it's not what it looks like" routine, but Linda wasn't having any of it. "Don't you dare try to explain this away," she continued, holding up one of the photographs. "This isn't a misunderstanding or a mistake or whatever bullshit you've been telling yourself to sleep at night. This is you deliberately choosing to destroy other people's lives because you're selfish and weak and apparently have no moral compass whatsoever. It was brutal. It was public. It was exactly what both of them deserved." Adrian finally found his voice and tried to step in, probably thinking he could somehow salvage the situation or at least prevent his wife from saying anything else that would make tomorrow's inevitable office gossip even more damaging. "Linda, please," he said. "Let's talk about this at home. Privately." She turned on him with the kind of fury that would have made a hurricane look like a gentle breeze. "Privately?" She laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. "You want to talk about this privately? You should have thought about privacy before you decided to have an affair, Adrian. You should have thought about privacy before you spent our anniversary money on hotel rooms with your employee. You should have thought about privacy before you made me look like a fool in front of everyone we know." Then she did something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. She slapped him. Hard. The sound echoed across the backyard like a gunshot, and Adrian stumbled backward, his hand flying to his cheek with a look of absolute shock. The crowd that was left erupted in a mixture of gasps and what sounded suspiciously like a few people trying not to applaud. Even some of the people who'd been heading for the exits turned around to see what had happened. 23 years, Linda said again, shaking her head sadly. 23 years wasted on a man who turned out to be nothing but a lying, cheating piece of garbage. And with that, she walked away, leaving Adrian standing there holding his face while 40-some witnesses absorbed the fact that they'd just watched a kindergarten teacher deliver the most devastating public humiliation in recent memory. The party was officially over. The thing about nuclear explosions is that they don't just destroy everything in the immediate blast radius. They leave behind radiation that contaminates the area for decades afterward. That's basically what happened to Isabel and Adrian's lives in the weeks following what everyone was calling the birthday party massacre. The fallout spread through their social circles, professional networks, and family relationships like a particularly virulent strain of gossip-fueled cancer, destroying everything it touched with the kind of thoroughness that would have impressed the guys who designed actual nuclear weapons. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy watching it happen. After months of being played for a fool, after weeks of pretending to believe Isabel's ridiculous lies, while she continued screwing her boss and laughing about how stupid I was, seeing their lives implode in spectacular fashion felt like the most satisfying revenge I could have possibly imagined. It was better than winning the lottery, better than getting a promotion, better than finding out your least favorite celebrity had been caught doing something embarrassing. It was pure, undiluted justice served at exactly the right temperature. The professional consequences hit them first and hardest. Adrian resigned from Morrison & Associates within 48 hours of the party, which was probably the smartest decision he'd made in months. Apparently, having photographic evidence of your affair with a subordinate distributed to half your professional network tends to make continuing your career at the same company somewhat problematic. Who would have thought? But resignation was just the beginning of his problems. Word traveled fast in the architectural community, and within a week, everyone in the industry knew exactly why Adrian Carter had suddenly become available for new opportunities. Job interviews became exercises in explaining why prospective employers should overlook his recent tendency toward spectacularly poor judgment and catastrophic decision-making. Spoiler alert, most of them weren't interested in taking that particular risk. Isabel's situation was somehow even worse. She couldn't exactly resign from the firm without an explanation, and staying meant facing her colleagues every single day while they whispered about her relationship with their former boss. The woman who'd once been the rising star of the company, the one everyone predicted would make partner within 5 years, suddenly found herself treated like she had some kind of contagious disease that could be transmitted through casual conversation. Her work started suffering almost immediately. Clients who'd specifically requested her for projects began asking for different architects. Colleagues who'd once sought out her opinions on design challenges suddenly found reasons to consult with other team members. The promotion she'd been chasing for months, the one she'd claimed was so stressful that she needed Adrian's emotional support to cope with it, evaporated faster than morning dew in the desert. But the professional fallout was nothing compared to what happened to their personal relationships. Turns out that when you destroy 2 marriages in front of 45 witnesses, people tend to take sides, and those sides aren't usually yours. Isabel's family was devastated in a way that went far beyond simple disappointment. Her parents, who'd always seen her as their perfect daughter, the successful architect with the loving husband and the bright future, couldn't reconcile that image with the woman they'd watched get exposed as a cheating liar at her own birthday party. Her mother stopped calling. Her father refused to see her. Her sister, who'd always looked up to her as a role model, wrote her a letter that was apparently so brutal that Isabel called me crying about it, which was hilarious, considering she no longer had the right to expect sympathy from me about anything. The friend group she'd cultivated over the years fractured like glass hitting concrete. Some people tried to remain neutral, but neutrality is hard to maintain when one side has photographic evidence and the other side has elaborate explanations about innocent hotel room meetings. Most of her college friends, the ones who'd known both of us for years and had always seen us as the stable couple in their social circle, made it clear that they weren't interested in maintaining friendships with someone who destroyed a marriage through calculated deception. Adrian's situation was equally grim. Linda had wasted no time in filing for divorce, and she'd hired the kind of lawyer who specialized in making cheating spouses pay for their infidelity in the most expensive way possible. The house they'd lived in for 15 years? Gone. The retirement savings he'd been building for 2 decades? Split down the middle, with Linda getting the larger share as compensation for emotional distress. The comfortable middle-class lifestyle he'd enjoyed while screwing around with my wife? History. His own family turned on him with the kind of righteous fury usually reserved for war criminals and people who talk during movies. His parents, who'd adored Linda and considered her the daughter they'd never had, made it clear that their son was no longer welcome at family gatherings as long as he continued to exist in his current form. His brother, who'd been his best man at his wedding, sent him a text message that simply said, "Don't contact me again." The really beautiful part was watching them try to maintain their relationship in the aftermath of destroying everything else in their lives for it. Turns out that affairs lose a lot of their excitement when they're no longer secret, when the thrill of sneaking around is replaced by the reality of being social pariahs who've burned every bridge they ever built. They lasted about 6 weeks. The breakup was as messy and public as everything else about their relationship had become. Isabel sent me a series of increasingly unhinged text messages about how Adrian had abandoned her in her time of need and revealed his true character when things got difficult. Apparently, the man who'd been so eager to whisper sweet nothings about her body and plan secret hotel meetings suddenly wasn't quite as interested in being associated with her when that association came with professional suicide and social ostracism. Adrian, for his part, tried to blame the entire affair on Isabel, claiming she'd seduced him and manipulated him into making poor decisions. The man who'd called me a dumbass and bragged about sneaking my wife away was suddenly painting himself as the victim of some kind of feminine wiles that had overcome his otherwise sterling moral character. It was pathetic. It was predictable. It was exactly what both of them deserved. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I'd expected, mostly because Leo had done such a thorough job of documenting Isabel's infidelity that she didn't have much room to argue about asset division or spousal support. The prenup we'd signed before getting married, which I'd insisted on over her objections, turned out to be worth its weight in gold. She got to keep her car and her personal belongings. Everything else, the house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, stayed with me. She tried to contest it, of course, hired her own lawyer and attempted to argue that she deserved half of everything because she'd contributed to the marriage and deserved consideration for her emotional investment. But it's hard to make a case for emotional investment when there's photographic evidence of you investing your emotions in someone else's hotel room. The final decree was signed on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 4 months and 12 days after her birthday party. I walked out of the courthouse a free man, legally and officially divorced from the woman who'd spent months systematically lying to me while screwing her boss and laughing about how easy it was to fool me. It felt like the first day of the rest of my life. You know what nobody tells you about revenge? It's like eating a really expensive meal at a 5-star restaurant. Absolutely satisfying while it's happening, but afterward you're left with this weird, empty feeling, like you've consumed something that was supposed to fill you up but somehow didn't. Don't get me wrong. Watching Isabel and Adrian's lives implode in spectacular fashion was everything I'd hoped it would be and more. But once the dust settled and the divorce papers were signed and the last of the gossip died down, I found myself sitting in my empty house wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. The house felt different without her stuff in it. Not better or worse, exactly, just different. Like when you rearrange furniture and can't quite figure out why the room feels off until you realize the couch is facing the wrong direction. For weeks after she moved out, I kept expecting to hear her humming in the kitchen or find her shoes by the front door or wake up to the sound of her phone buzzing with messages from her lover. The silence was both peaceful and unsettling, like wearing a perfectly fitted suit that you're not quite sure looks right on you. I went through what I guess you'd call an adjustment period, which is a polite way of saying I spent about 3 months acting like a recently divorced guy who wasn't entirely sure how to be a human being anymore. I ate cereal for dinner more often than any self-respecting adult should. I binged Netflix series about serial killers and true crime documentaries, probably because hearing about other people's dramatic life implosions made my own situation seem relatively tame. I reorganized my closet 4 times and seriously considered getting a dog before remembering that I'd never been particularly good at keeping plants alive, let alone actual living creatures that required attention and care. The weird thing was how normal everything felt after a while. Like, you spend months thinking that your life is going to be fundamentally different after something this dramatic happens, but then you wake up one Tuesday and realize that you still need to go to work and pay bills and remember to buy groceries. The sun still rises, traffic still sucks, and people still make small talk about the weather like the entire foundation of your existence hasn't just been completely rebuilt from scratch. Work became my refuge, which was ironic considering that overwork had supposedly been one of the reasons Isabel needed emotional support from her boss. I threw myself into projects with the kind of intensity usually reserved for people training for the Olympics or trying to cure cancer. The Henderson account that had been keeping me busy during the affair turned into the most successful campaign our agency had ever produced, probably because I was channeling all my post-divorce energy into making sure every detail was absolutely perfect. My colleagues noticed the change, of course. It's hard to miss when someone goes from guy whose wife is cheating on him but doesn't know it yet to guy who publicly destroyed his cheating wife and is now working like his life depends on it. They were tactful about it, mostly, offering to grab drinks after work or suggesting weekend activities with the kind of careful enthusiasm that suggested they discussed my mental health in private conversations I wasn't invited to. Leo was less subtle. "You need to get back out there," he announced one Friday evening when he'd cornered me at a bar downtown and started his unsolicited lecture about the importance of moving on with my life. "I'm not saying you need to find another wife tomorrow, but you can't spend the rest of your existence eating cereal for dinner and reorganizing your sock drawer." "My sock drawer is very well organized," I pointed out. "Color coordinated and everything." That's exactly my point. He wasn't wrong, but the idea of dating again felt about as appealing as voluntary root canal surgery. How do you explain to someone new that your last relationship ended when you discovered your wife was cheating and decided to expose the affair at her birthday party in front of half the neighborhood? How do you convince someone that you're not a vindictive psychopath who might publicly humiliate them if they ever cross you? But life has a funny way of making decisions for you when you're too scared or stubborn to make them yourself. I started volunteering at a community center downtown, partly because Leo had threatened to stage an intervention if I didn't find some kind of social activity that didn't involve Netflix and cereal, and partly because doing something useful for other people seemed like a good way to remember that the world existed beyond my own drama. The center ran programs for kids, seniors, job training, basic literacy, the kind of genuinely important work that makes you feel less like a selfish asshole and more like a contributing member of society. That's where I met Clara. She was teaching a GED prep class for adults who'd never finished high school, and the first thing I noticed about her was that she laughed with her whole face. Not just her mouth, but her eyes and her cheeks, and even her forehead, like joy was something that started in her chest and radiated outward until it encompassed her entire being. It was the kind of genuine, unguarded happiness that you don't see very often in adults, probably because most of us have learned to be careful about showing too much enthusiasm about anything. The second thing I noticed was that she didn't seem to have an agenda. She wasn't teaching because it looked good on her resume, or because she needed community service hours for some court-ordered requirement. She was there because she genuinely believed that education could change people's lives, and she wanted to be part of that change. It was refreshing in a way that I hadn't realized I needed until I experienced it. We started talking during coffee breaks, casual conversations about the programs at the center and the students we were working with. She had opinions about everything. Education policy, local politics, the best place to get tacos in the city, but she expressed them without the kind of aggressive certainty that suggested she thought anyone who disagreed with her was an idiot. She was confident without being arrogant, passionate without being preachy, intelligent without being condescending. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to ask her to have dinner with me, partly because I was out of practice at asking women out, and partly because I was terrified of screwing up something that was making me feel human again. When I finally managed to stumble through the invitation, she said yes with the kind of straightforward enthusiasm that suggested she'd been wondering why it had taken me so long to ask. Our first date was at a little Italian place that she recommended, and we ended up talking for 4 hours about everything from her students' progress to my work to our completely opposite opinions about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. She didn't ask about my divorce, and I didn't volunteer the details, but somehow I found myself telling her about the community garden I'd started in my backyard and the pottery class I'd been considering taking and my plan to finally learn how to make bread from scratch. She listened like she was genuinely interested in my newfound domestic ambitions, and when I walked her to her car at the end of the evening, she kissed me goodnight with the kind of sweetness that made me remember why people write songs about falling in love. We took things slowly, partly because I was still figuring out how to be in a relationship with someone who didn't lie to me, and partly because Clara was the kind of person who believed that the best things in life were worth waiting for. She didn't play games or send mixed signals or require me to decode hidden meanings in her text messages. When she was happy, she said so. When she was frustrated, she talked about it. When she wanted to spend time with me, she suggested specific plans instead of dropping hints and hoping I'd figure it out. It was revolutionary. 6 months after that first dinner, I woke up in my house, the same house where I'd discovered Isabel's affair, where I'd planned her public humiliation, where I'd sat alone eating cereal and questioning my life choices, and realized that I was genuinely happy. Not just content or satisfied or relieved that the drama was over, but actually, legitimately happy in a way that I hadn't been in years. Clara was making coffee in my kitchen, humming some song I didn't recognize while she waited for the pot to finish brewing. She was wearing one of my old college t-shirts and a pair of pajama pants with cartoon cats on them, and her hair was sticking up in about 15 different directions. She looked absolutely ridiculous and completely beautiful, and when she noticed me watching her from the doorway, she grinned and said, "Good morning, handsome. Ready to start another day?" And you know what? I was ready. Ready for another day, another week, another year of waking up next to someone who didn't lie to me or cheat on me or make me question my own sanity. Ready for a relationship built on honesty instead of deception, trust instead of surveillance, genuine affection instead of manipulation. Looking back at everything that had happened, the betrayal, the revenge, the divorce, the slow process of rebuilding my life from scratch, I realized that exposing Isabel's affair at her birthday party hadn't just been about getting even with her for making me look like a fool. It had been about freeing myself from a marriage that was slowly killing me, one lie at a time. And now, standing in my kitchen watching Clara dance badly to music only she could hear, I understood what freedom actually felt like. It felt like coming home. At my wife's sister's engagement party, she took my name off the family list. She laughed in my face. Dinners for real family only. I just smiled, and placed the ring on the table. Then I stood up. I'm done. Her face dropped. She screamed, "Wait, Dot." So here I am, Adrian Wells, 32 years old and apparently the biggest disappointment to grace Boston's upper-crust social scene since someone decided cargo shorts were acceptable wedding attire. 5 years. That's how long I've been married to Camille Harrison Wells. Though let's be honest, she only tacked on my last name because it looked good on the Christmas cards. 5 whole years of pretending that love conquers all, that her family's passive-aggressive bullshit was just quirky family dynamics, and that I could somehow win over people who looked at me like I'd crawled out of a dumpster behind Fenway Park. Let me paint you a picture of the Harrison family circus, because honestly, it's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Horrifying, but you can't look away. First up, we've got Marjorie Harrison, Camille's mother, who used to teach art to middle schoolers before she decided that wasn't pretentious enough for her taste. Now she owns this gallery in Back Bay where she sells overpriced paintings to other rich people who think dropping $5,000 on what looks like a toddler's finger painting makes them cultured. Marjorie has this way of looking at me like I'm a stain on her Persian rug, not quite disgusted enough to acknowledge it directly, but definitely planning to have me professionally cleaned out of existence. Then there's Isabel, Camille's younger sister, who's 26 and has never worked a day in her life unless you count influencing people to buy expensive skincare products she gets for free. She's engaged to Julian Remington. And yes, those Remingtons, the ones with the bank that's older than the city itself. Julian's the type of guy who wears boat shoes year-round and calls everyone sport, but apparently, that's exactly the kind of genetic lottery winner the Harrison family was hoping to add to their collection. Me? I'm just Adrian Wells, financial consultant from Southie, son of a construction worker and a nurse. I work my ass off, pay my bills, and somehow thought that being a decent human being would be enough to earn some basic respect from my wife's family. Yeah, I know. What was I thinking, right? The thing is, I genuinely loved Camille when we first met. She was different then, or maybe I was just too blind to see the warning signs flashing like neon lights in Times Square. We met at a coffee shop near her job at some nonprofit that I'm pretty sure existed solely to make rich people feel better about themselves. She ordered this ridiculously complicated drink. Half CAF oat milk macchiato with vanilla syrup and a dash of cinnamon, no foam. And when the barista looked confused, I stepped in and helped translate. She laughed, and for a moment, she seemed real. Human. Not like the porcelain doll she'd turn into whenever her family was around. Those early days were good, I'm not gonna lie. We'd grab dinner at hole-in-the-wall places in the North End, walk along the harbor, and she'd actually listen when I talked about my work or my dreams of maybe starting my own consulting firm someday. She'd roll her eyes when I made jokes about her fancy friends. But it was playful, not cruel. I thought I'd found someone who could see past all the social bullshit that seems to consume everyone in this city. Then I met her family, and everything changed faster than the weather in New England. Suddenly, my job wasn't stable and respectable. It was adequate, I suppose. My apartment in Dorchester wasn't cozy. It was quaint, which is rich people speak for embarrassingly small. My friends weren't down to earth. They were colorful characters, like I was running a traveling circus instead of having normal human relationships. The worst part? Camille started changing too. At first, it was subtle. She'd suggest I wear different clothes when we went to family dinners. Nothing major, just maybe something a little more polished. Then it was my hair. Apparently, my regular barber wasn't sophisticated enough, so she booked me at some salon where they charged more for a haircut than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Before I knew it, I was getting critiqued on everything from my handshake to the way I pronounced certain words. But I kept telling myself it was temporary growing pains. That once we got married, once I proved I was committed to being part of their world, things would get better. I was like a guy standing in a house that's clearly on fire, insisting that the smoke alarm must be malfunctioning because surely everything's fine, right? The wedding was our first real taste of what married life would be like, and let me tell you, it was about as fun as a root canal performed by a blindfolded dentist. Marjorie took over every single decision, from the flowers to the menu to the guest list. When I suggested inviting my college buddies, she got this look on her face like I'd proposed holding the ceremony at Hooters. "Perhaps we should keep it intimate," she said, which translated to "your friends are not welcome in our sacred temple of pretension." Camille just sat there through all of it, nodding along like a bobblehead doll. When I tried to talk to her about it later, she'd get defensive. My mother just wants everything to be perfect, she'd say. This is important to her. What about what was important to me? What about what was important to us as a couple? Apparently, those weren't questions we were allowed to ask. After the wedding, I thought things might settle down. We moved into a nice house in Cambridge. Well, I should say I moved us into a nice house in Cambridge, since my name was the only one on the mortgage. Camille didn't work anymore. She'd quit her nonprofit job to focus on being a wife, which apparently meant planning elaborate dinner parties for her mother's friends and spending her days at yoga classes and boutique shopping. I kept working, bringing in a steady income, handling all the finances, maintaining the house, and trying to be the husband I thought she wanted. But nothing I did was ever quite right. If I worked late, I wasn't prioritizing our marriage. If I came home early, I was being clingy. If I suggested we spend a quiet evening at home, I was being boring. If I planned something fun, it wasn't the right kind of fun for people like us. The family dinners became a weekly torture session disguised as quality time. Every Sunday, we'd sit around Marjorie's dining room table while she held court, discussing art exhibitions I'd never heard of, name-dropping people I'd never meet, and making subtle digs about everything from my career prospects to my table manners. Isabel would chime in with her own little barbs, usually about how Julian was doing such important work at the bank, while I just sat there, smiling and nodding like a trained seal. Camille would occasionally throw me a bone, mentioning some small success at work or defending me when the attacks got too obvious. But she never stood up to them, never told them to back off, never made it clear that disrespecting her husband was unacceptable. Instead, she'd pull me aside later and ask me to try to fit in better or make more of an effort with Mother. That's when I started to realize the truth that I'd been avoiding for months. I wasn't Camille's partner. I was her project, her fixer-upper husband who just needed the right renovations to become acceptable to her family. And no matter how many improvements I made, there would always be something else wrong with me, something else that needed changing. But I kept swallowing it all, kept telling myself that love would be enough, that eventually, they'd see who I really was and appreciate what I brought to the table. I was wrong about that too, but it would take one particularly humiliating evening to finally open my eyes to just how wrong I'd been. Looking back now, I can see all the cracks that were forming behind my smile, all the ways I was slowly disappearing into this version of myself that I didn't even recognize. I was like a guy trying to fit into clothes that were 3 sizes too small, convinced that if I just sucked it in hard enough, eventually, they'd fit perfectly. Spoiler alert, they never do. The gallery smelled like expensive perfume and pretension, which, let me tell you, is not a winning combination. Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon, and instead of being at my office crunching numbers like a normal person, I'm standing in Marjorie's precious art sanctuary watching 3 grown women plan what might as well be the social event of the century. Why? Because apparently, when you're engaged to banking royalty, every decision requires a family council meeting that would make the UN jealous. The Harrison Gallery, and yes, Marjorie made damn sure her name was plastered across the front window in gold lettering, was one of those places that screamed, if you have to ask the price, you can't afford it. White walls, polished concrete floors, and lighting that made everything look like it belonged in a museum. Which, considering the prices Marjorie charged for what looked like abstract finger paintings, maybe it did belong in a museum. A museum of highway robbery. I'd been standing there for about 20 minutes, watching this whole production unfold like some twisted version of wedding planning reality TV. Isabel was perched on a white leather chair that probably cost more than my car, flipping through what looked like the guest list for the Met Gala. Marjorie was pacing around with her reading glasses perched on her nose, holding court like she was planning a state dinner instead of an engagement party. And Camille, my loving wife, was right there in the thick of it, nodding along to every ridiculous suggestion like it was gospel. Now, darling, Marjorie was saying, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she reserved for when she was about to say something particularly cutting. We absolutely must be selective about the guest list. This isn't just any engagement party. It's Isabel's introduction to the Remington social circle. We need to make sure everyone understands the caliber of people we associate with. Caliber. like we were talking about ammunition instead of human beings. But sure, Marjorie, let's reduce everyone to their net worth and social standing. That's not dystopian at all. Isabel giggled, actually giggled, like she was still 16 instead of 26, and waved her engagement ring around. The thing was massive, probably worth more than I made in 6 months. Julian's mother already approved the venue, she gushed. The Museum of Fine Arts. Can you believe it? We're going to have the entire Renaissance wing to ourselves. Of course they were. Because nothing says we're better than everyone else, like renting out a museum for a party. I wondered if they were planning to charge admission or if the general public would just have to settle for looking at the art through the windows. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Camille chimed in, and I felt my jaw clench. She was using that voice, the one she'd developed since marrying into this family. Higher pitched, more nasal, like she was auditioning for a role in some period drama about rich people problems. Have you thought about the theme? Something elegant, obviously. Oh, absolutely, Isabel replied, flipping her perfectly straightened hair over her shoulder. Julian and I were thinking something classical. You know, to match the venue. Very sophisticated, very us. Very them. Right. Because nothing said sophisticated like two people who'd never worked a real job in their lives throwing a party that cost more than most people's annual salary. I cleared my throat, figuring maybe it was time to remind them that I existed. Hey, if you guys need any help with the planning, I'd be happy to. Oh, that's sweet of you, Adrian. Marjorie interrupted, not even bothering to look in my direction. She was studying the guest list like it contained the secrets of the universe. But I think we have everything well in hand. This requires a certain touch. A certain touch. Translation, stay in your lane, working class boy. But I pressed on, because apparently, I'm a glutton for punishment. I just thought, you know, maybe I could help with the logistics or the budget or... This time it was Isabel who cut me off, and her laugh was about as warm as a New England winter. Budget? She repeated, like I'd just suggested we serve hot dogs and beer. Oh, Adrian, you're so practical. But this isn't really a budget kind of situation. Julian's family is handling all the financial aspects. We're more concerned with the aesthetic. The aesthetic? Of course. Why worry about little things like money when you could focus on the really important stuff, like making sure the napkins match the flowers, and the flowers match the general sense of superiority radiating from everyone in the room. Besides, Marjorie added, finally gracing me with a glance that lasted about half a second, Isabel has connections in the art world through the gallery. People who understand these kinds of events. It's all about knowing the right people. And there it was. The not-so-subtle reminder that I wasn't one of the right people. I was just the guy who happened to be married to someone who was barely tolerated by the right people herself. Camille must have sensed the tension because she reached over and patted my arm like I was a dog who'd gotten too excited at a dinner party. Don't worry, honey, she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. We'll make sure you know exactly what to do when the time comes. When the time comes. Like I was a trained monkey who needed specific instructions on how to perform at their circus. They went back to their planning, and I went back to standing there like a piece of furniture. They discussed everything from the color scheme. Apparently, anything too vibrant would be gauche, to the menu, because God forbid they serve anything that normal people might actually enjoy eating. Every few minutes, one of them would make a comment about keeping things classy or ensuring the party reflected well on both families. Both families. That was rich, considering they were doing everything possible to pretend my family didn't exist. The conversation meandered from flowers to music to the guest list, and that's when things got really interesting. Marjorie was reading names off her list, and Isabel was either nodding approval or making disgusted faces like she was judging a wine that had gone bad. The Weatherbys, obviously, Marjorie was saying. And the Ashfords. Oh, and we simply must invite the Pemberton family. Their daughter just got into Harvard. What about some of my friends from college? Isabel asked, though she didn't sound particularly enthusiastic about it. Darling, this isn't a reunion, Marjorie replied with a wave of her manicured hand. This is about establishing your place in society. We need people who matter, people who can appreciate what this union represents. What this union represents. Like Isabel was marrying the Prince of England instead of a guy whose greatest accomplishment was being born into the right family. I was starting to zone out, letting their voices fade into the background noise of entitlement and social climbing, when I heard something that snapped me back to attention. "Now, what should we do about Adrian?" Marjorie asked, and suddenly all three pairs of eyes were on me like I was an exhibit in their precious museum. "What about Adrian?" Camille asked, and I could hear something in her voice that I didn't like. Something calculating. Marjorie pursed her lips, which was never a good sign. "Well, obviously he'll be attending, but perhaps we should consider where exactly he fits into all of this." Where I fit. Like I was a puzzle piece they were trying to force into the wrong spot. Isabel leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement people get when they're about to say something cruel. "I mean, Julian's family doesn't really know him, do they? And some of the other guests might not understand. You know, the dynamic." The dynamic. Jesus Christ, they were talking about me like I was a social disease they needed to contain. "What Isabel means," Camille said, and that calculating tone was getting stronger, "is that this is a very specific kind of event. The people attending will have certain expectations." Expectations? About what? About how a human being should behave at a party. Exactly. Marjorie nodded, looking pleased that everyone was on the same page. "We want to make sure the evening goes smoothly. No awkward conversations, no uncomfortable moments. No uncomfortable moments." Right. Because the most uncomfortable thing about this whole situation was definitely my potential presence, not the fact that they were planning an engagement party that cost more than most people's weddings. "So what are you suggesting?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to hear the answer. They exchanged glances, the kind of looks that said they'd already discussed this when I wasn't around. Which, let's be honest, they probably had. "Well," Camille said slowly, "maybe you could just, blend in. Be polite, smile, don't make any waves. Don't make any waves." Translation: sit down, shut up, and try not to embarrass us in front of our fancy friends. I stared at my wife, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't a request. This wasn't even a suggestion. This was an instruction manual for how to be invisible at my own sister-in-law's engagement party. "Got it," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "Just show up, be polite, and don't make trouble." Exactly. Isabel clapped her hands together like I'd just solved world hunger. "See? Adrian gets it. This is going to be perfect." Perfect. Sure. If by perfect they meant a complete humiliation disguised as a family celebration. As I drove home that night, Camille chattering away about centerpieces and place cards, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't just being excluded from the planning, I was being managed. Handled. Like a potential problem that needed to be contained. But hey, at least I knew exactly what was expected of me. Absolutely nothing. You know that feeling when you're getting ready for something that you know is going to suck, but you do it anyway because you're either a masochist or you still have some delusional hope that maybe this time will be different. Yeah, that was me on the morning of Isabel's engagement party, standing in front of my closet like I was selecting armor for battle instead of clothes for what should have been a celebration. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was spending more time getting ready for this party than I had for my own wedding. But then again, my wedding had been a quick courthouse affair because Marjorie had insisted that a proper ceremony would take months to plan correctly, and by then, Camille might come to her senses. Spoiler alert, she never did, but here we were 5 years later, and I was still trying to prove I belonged in their world. My navy suit hung on the closet door like a symbol of everything I was trying to be but would never actually become in their eyes. I'd bought it specifically for occasions like this, family events where I needed to look the part of the respectable husband. It was tailored, expensive, expensive for me, and made me look like I could actually afford to shop somewhere other than Men's Wearhouse. The salesperson had assured me it was timeless and sophisticated, which I'm pretty sure was sales speak for "this will help you blend in with people who have more money than you." Camille was in the bathroom, and I could hear her getting ready through the door, the sound of multiple products being applied, hair being styled, and what sounded like a small pharmacy being organized on the counter. She'd been in there for over an hour, which wasn't unusual for events involving her family. The bigger the audience of rich people, the longer the preparation time. It was like some kind of mathematical formula. Social status times number of attendees equals hours spent in bathroom. "Adrian, have you seen my diamond earrings?" she called out. her voice slightly muffled by what I assumed was a face mask or some other beauty product that cost more than my monthly gym membership. Which diamond earrings? I called back, because apparently we owned enough diamond jewelry to require specification. This was my life now. A guy who used to think cubic zirconia was fancy, married to a woman who had multiple sets of real diamonds. The ones from Tiffany. The ones Mother gave me for my birthday. Of course, the ones from Tiffany. Because why would anyone shop anywhere else when you could pay 3 times as much for the privilege of carrying around a little blue bag? I found them on her dresser, nestled in their little velvet box like tiny overpriced stars. Everything in our bedroom screamed, "We have money." From the Egyptian cotton sheets that I was afraid to sleep on because they cost more than my first car, to the artwork on the walls that Marjorie had helped us select, red, forced upon us because our taste was apparently too pedestrian for our own home. "Found them," I said, setting the box on the bathroom counter. "Thank you, honey," Camille replied, and I caught a glimpse of her in the mirror. She was applying makeup with the precision of a surgeon, each stroke calculated and deliberate. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful, but there was something different about the way she prepared for these family events. It was like watching someone put on a costume, transforming from the woman I married into this perfectly polished version of herself that her family expected. I went back to getting dressed, trying not to think too hard about what the evening would bring. The plan was simple. Show up, smile, be polite, don't embarrass anyone, and try to survive until we could go home. It was basically the same strategy one used for all Harrison family events. Like I was a foreign exchange student trying to navigate an alien culture without accidentally insulting anyone. My shoes were Italian leather, another purchase Camille had insisted on after Marjorie made some comment about how a man's shoes say everything about his character. Apparently, my previous shoes had been saying that my character was unfortunate, so we dropped $500 on footwear that made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. As I was adjusting my tie, silk, of course, because apparently cotton ties were for peasants, Camille emerged from the bathroom looking absolutely stunning. She was wearing an emerald green dress that hugged her curves in all the right places and probably cost more than most people spend on rent. Her hair was swept up in some kind of elaborate style that looked effortless but had definitely taken an hour to achieve, and her makeup was flawless. "How do I look?" she asked, doing a little turn that made the dress shimmer under the bedroom lights. "You look amazing," I said, and I meant it. She really did look incredible. For a moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place, before all the family drama and social expectations had gotten between us. But then she looked at me, and I could see her mentally cataloging my appearance like a checklist. Hair, acceptable. Suit, appropriate. Shoes, expensive enough. Expression, needs work. "You look handsome," she said, but there was something clinical about the way she said it, like she was confirming that I met the minimum requirements rather than expressing genuine affection. "Just remember what we talked about, okay?" "What we talked about?" "Right. The rules. Don't mention work unless someone asks. Don't tell any stories about my family. Don't bring up sports unless it's golf or sailing. Don't laugh too loudly. Don't drink too much. Don't be too friendly with the waitstaff. Basically, don't be myself in any recognizable way." "Got it," I said, straightening my jacket. "Smile, be polite, don't make waves." "Exactly." She checked her reflection one more time, adjusting an earring that looked perfectly fine to me. "This is important, Adrian. Isabel only gets engaged once, and there are going to be very influential people there tonight." "Very influential people." "Right. Because God forbid any of these influential people should discover that I was actually a human being with thoughts and opinions and a personality that hadn't been approved by committee." We drove to the Museum of Fine Arts in relative silence, Camille occasionally checking her makeup in the passenger mirror and me trying to psyche myself up for what was essentially a performance. I felt like an actor preparing for a role I didn't want to play, in a show I didn't want to be in, for an audience that didn't want to see me. The museum looked even more imposing at night, all lit up and majestic against the Boston skyline. There were already cars pulling up to the valet stand. Expensive cars, the kind that came with their own zip codes. BMWs, Mercedes, a few Teslas for the environmentally conscious rich people, and what looked like at least 2 Bentleys because apparently some people felt the need to drive around in something that cost more than most people's houses. "Remember," Camille said as we pulled up to the valet, "we're representing both families tonight." Both families. Sure we were. Because nothing said family unity, like spending weeks planning how to make sure I didn't embarrass anyone by existing too obviously. I tipped the valet, probably more than necessary, but old habits die hard, and offered Camille my arm as we walked toward the entrance. She took it with the same enthusiasm she might show for touching a subway pole, but at least she took it. The museum's entrance was all marble and glass, with lighting that made everything look like a movie set. There were already people milling around in the lobby, and I could tell immediately that this wasn't going to be a normal party. These people didn't just look wealthy. They looked like wealth was such an integral part of their identity that they'd probably forgotten what it felt like to check a bank balance or worry about whether they could afford something. "Here we go," I muttered under my breath, straightening my shoulders and putting on what I hoped looked like a genuine smile. Camille squeezed my arm, but not in a supportive way, more like a warning, a reminder to stick to the script, play my part, and try not to ruin her family's big night. As we approached the reception desk, I caught a glimpse of Marjorie holding court near the entrance to the main exhibition hall, resplendent in what looked like a designer gown that probably cost more than my car. She was surrounded by a circle of similarly dressed women, all of them laughing at something that I was sure wasn't actually funny, but was socially appropriate to find amusing. This was it. Game time. The moment where I'd either prove that I could hang with Boston's elite or confirm once and for all that I was exactly as out of place as they'd always believed. My gut was telling me this wasn't going to end well. But then again, my gut had been telling me that about this whole marriage for years, and I'd been ignoring it like a pro. Time to see how wrong I could be. Walking into the Museum of Fine Arts that night felt like stepping onto the set of some twisted reality show where the only rule was see how long the middle-class guy can survive before he completely loses his shit. The lobby was buzzing with the kind of energy you only get when you put a bunch of rich people in one place and tell them they're celebrating something important. Everyone was dressed to the nines, air-kissing each other like they were European royalty, and speaking in those hushed, reverent tones that people use when they want everyone around them to know how sophisticated they are. The reception area had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel rather than a museum. There were flowers everywhere. Not just any flowers, mind you, but the kind of elaborate arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. White roses, orchids, and some other exotic-looking shit that I couldn't identify, but that screamed, "We have more money than we know what to do with." The lighting was soft and golden, making everyone look like they were posing for a magazine shoot. And there was classical music playing just loud enough to provide ambience, but not so loud that it would interfere with the sound of people congratulating themselves on being wealthy. I felt like I was wearing a costume as Camille and I approached the reception desk,